5:26. To what tribulation did Jesus there refer? Some Bible commentators have reasoned that it was the tribulation that came upon Jerusalem in 70 CE, though they also realized that the events described thereafter evidently would take place at a time that, from a human standpoint, was then distant. They reasoned that the expression immediately after conveyed God's perspective of the time involved, or that the certainty of what was to occur was being expressed by language that placed the events immediately before the reader. However, since the prophecy at Matthew 24:4-22 also missed at 13:5-20 and Luke 21:8-24a clearly has a dual fulfillment, might the tribulation referred to at Matthew 24:29 and Mark 13:24 be the tribulation during the second and final fulfillment of what was foretold at Matthew 24:21 and Mark 13:19? Viewed in the light of the Bible as a whole, this seems most likely. Do the terms used in the Greek text allow for such a view? Definitely. When Matthew 24:29 refers to those days and when Mark 13:24 mentions those days and that tribulation, the Greek grammar does allow for such an understanding. It seems that Jesus' prophecy is saying that after the outbreak of the coming global tribulation, there will be striking phenomena as represented by sun and moon being darkened, stars falling, and powers of heaven being shaken, as well as fulfillment of the sign of the Son of Man. About 3 decades after Jerusalem's destruction, the Apostle John, with reference to great crowd of persons from all nations, tribes, and peoples, was told, "These are the ones that come out of the great tribulation." Re 7:13-14 The fact that a great crowd comes out of the great tribulation shows that they survive it. This is confirmed by a similar expression at Acts 7:9-10. God was with Joseph, and he delivered him out of all his tribulations. Joseph's being delivered out of all his tribulations meant not only that he was enabled to endure them but also that he survived the afflictions he experienced. It is noteworthy that the Apostle Paul referred to the execution of God's judgment upon the ungodly as tribulation. He wrote, "This takes into account that it is righteous on God's part to repay tribulation to those who make textoi acute miritra longo." Tribute 11:28 Paul acknowledged that men such as Apollos, Cephas, and himself in a sense belonged to or were servants of the Corinthian congregation. 1 Co 3:21-22 Yet some in that congregation were criticizing and judging Paul, which attitude grew out of their sectarianism, their fleshliness rather than spirituality, their looking to men instead of to Christ. 1 Co 9:1-4 Paul ably defended his ministry. 1 Co 9:5-27, setting forth the general rule or view that a Christian should not be primarily concerned about the judgment of men, whether by the Corinthians or by some human court on a set day. Rather, Paul was concerned about the future day of judgment or evaluation by God through Jesus. He was the one who had given Paul the stewardship to which he must prove faithful. 1 Co 1:8-4. 2-5. Heb 4:13. Tribute. Generally, money or other valuable consideration, such as livestock, paid by a state or a ruler to a foreign power in acknowledgement of submission, to maintain peace, or to gain protection. For a consideration of the original language words, see taxation. Nations exacting tribute from other peoples frequently received gold and silver or products that were in short supply in their own land. In this way they strengthened their economic position while keeping the subjugated nations weak by drawing heavily on their resources. Judean Kings David 2:8. 2:6, Solomon PS 72:10. Compare 1 Kai 4:21-10. 23-25, Jehoshaphat 2ch 17:10-11, and Uzziah 2ch 26:8, as well as Israelite King Ahab 2 Kai 3:4-5, received tribute from other peoples. However, on account of unfaithfulness, the Israelites were often in an inferior position and were forced to pay tribute to others. As early as the time of the Judges, while under the domination of Moabite King Eglon, they paid tribute. JG 3:12-17 In later years, both the Kingdom of Judah and the Northern Kingdom of Israel paid tribute upon coming under the control of foreign powers. 2 Kai 3. 23. 35. At various times they paid what amounted to a form of tribute when buying off enemy nations or bribing others for military assistance. 2 Kai 12. 18. 15. 19, 20. 18. 13-16. Triumphal procession. A formal procession in celebration of victory over an enemy. The Greek word bo, meaning lead in a triumphal procession, occurs only twice in the scriptures, each time in a somewhat different illustrative setting. 2 Co 2. 14. Col 2. 15. Triumphal processions among the nations. Egypt, Assyria, and other nations commemorated their military victories with triumphal processions. In the days of the Roman Republic, one of the highest honors the Senate could bestow on a conquering general was to allow him to celebrate his victory with a formal and costly procession of triumph in which no detail of pomp and glory was overlooked. The Roman procession moved slowly along via triumphalis and up the winding ascent to the Temple of Jupiter atop the Capitoline Hill. Musicians playing and singing songs of victory were at the front, followed by young men leading the sacrificial cattle. Then came open carts loaded with booty, and tremendous floats illustrating battle scenes or the destruction of cities and temples, and perhaps topped with a figure of the vanquished commander. The captive kings, princes, and generals taken in the war, with their children and attendants, were led along in chains, often stripped naked, to their humiliation and shame. Next came the general's chariot, decorated in ivory and gold, wreathed with laurel, and drawn by 4 white horses or, on occasion, by elephants, lions, tigers, or deer. The conqueror's children sat at his feet or rode in a separate chariot behind him. Roman consuls and magistrates followed on foot, then lieutenants and military tribunes with the victorious army. All bedecked with garlands of laurel and gifts, and singing songs of praise to their leader. In the vanguard were the priests and their attendants. O textoi acute muritra longo. Tros 1129 of the archers may have represented the yoke of submission under which captives were forced to march. Christians share in triumphal procession. It was from such examples and general knowledge of the times that Paul drew his metaphor when writing to the Corinthians. Thanks be to God who always leads us in a triumphal procession in company with the Christ. 2 Co 2. 14-16. The picture presents Paul and fellow Christians as devoted subjects of God, in company with the Christ, as sons, ranking officers, and victorious soldiers, all following in God's train and being led by him in a grand triumphal procession along a perfumed route. At Colossians 2. 15, the situation is quite different. Here the enemy governments and authorities under Satan are described as the captives and prisoners in the triumphal procession. These Jehovah the Conqueror strips naked and exhibits in open public as defeated ones, the ones conquered by means of it, that is, by means of the torture stake mentioned in the previous verse. Christ's death on the torture stake not only provided the basis for removing the handwritten document, the law covenant, but also made it possible for Christians to be freed from bondage to the satanic powers of darkness. Other processions. The Bible also refers to other processions, occasions when throngs moved along together in celebration of outstanding events. David described Jehovah's victorious procession from Sinai to the Holy Temple site in Jerusalem. War chariots of God, captives, singers and musicians, and congregated throngs blessing the Holy One of Israel. PS 68. 17, 18, 24-26. A procession was included in the inaugural celebration at the time of completion of the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls in the days of Nehemiah. NE 12. 31. And a festival procession is referred to in Psalm 118. 27, evidently in connection with the annual festival of booths. Troas. The principal seaport of NW Asia Minor from which Paul departed on his first visit to Macedonia, and to which he later returned on occasion. It was located about 30 kilometers 90 miles of the Hellespont Dardanelles and about 25 kilometers 15 miles of the traditional site of ancient Troy. The same Greek term rendered Troas also applied to the Shroud, a region in Mysia that surrounded Troy. The city of Troas was first built during the latter part of the 4th century BCE by Antigonus, one of the generals of Alexander the Great. In 133 BCE it came under Roman control, and thereafter the region of Mysia became part of the Roman province of Asia. Julius Caesar for a time considered transferring the seat of the Roman government to Troas. Emperor Augustus further favored the city by making it a colonia, independent of the provincial governor of Asia, and by exempting its citizens from both land and poll taxes. On Paul's second journey, probably in the spring of 50 CE, and after passing through Phrygia and Galatia, the apostle and his companions came to Troas, for the Spirit of Jesus did not permit them to go into Bithynia. Acts 16. 6-8 Here in Troas, Paul had an unusual vision, one of a man calling to him, "Step over into Macedonia and help us." Immediately it was concluded, God had summoned us to declare the good news to them. The occurrence of us in this text and we in the following verses must mean that, here in Troas, Luke first joined Paul's party and made the voyage with them across the Aegean to Neapolis. Acts 16. 9-12. After leaving Ephesus on his third journey, Paul stopped in Troas and there preached the good news about the Christ, for as he says, "A door was opened to me in the Lord." But after an undisclosed period of time, the apostle became concerned that Titus had not arrived, and so he departed for Macedonia, hoping to find him there. Act 20. 1. 2 Co 2. 12, 13. Evidently Paul spent that winter in Greece before returning again to Troas in the spring of 56 CE. Act 20. 2-6 This o textoi acute miritra longo. Trophimus 1130 Paul's last visit to Carpus' home had been on his third journey in about 56 CE 2-4. 13. Trophimus Trophomidal. Feeding. Nourishing. A co-worker of the Apostle Paul. An Ephesian Gentile Christian. Act 21. 29 Trophimus became a Christian perhaps during Paul's extended Ephesian ministry on his third missionary journey. Afterward Trophimus was one of Paul's traveling companions.